Okay, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On Point EDC. First knife review in a long time, and definitely something I hope to be doing a little bit more regularly in the future as the channel, of course, continues to expand. Now, this particular knife is a fun little one from Monterey Bay Knives, which was essentially founded back in 2017 by custom knife maker Ray Laconico and Sanford Owen of Carmel Cutlery. Now, essentially, MBK, there really is just a project to release high-end production knives based on Laconico's designs, and they'd be using different, basically various OEMs along the way, depending on model. So this is essentially their sophomore outing and their second release in the MBK line, and this thing is just gorgeous. As you can tell, it is a titanium frame lock knife. Now, some key common characteristics in design language, basically when you're looking at a titanium frame lock folding knife, is you're really going to see that Reeve integral lock. You know, it's basically an evolution of the Walker liner lock. You're going to want something, of course, it's going to have a titanium handle. It's kind of in the name, titanium frame lock. And then essentially it's going to have that frame lock integrated into the handle scale versus being a liner. So with those basics out of the way, this is the MBK EZC. It's essentially a production take on the custom Laconico EZC. EZC standing for Easy Carry. And this particular model was produced by Kaiser Knives of China. So you guys can expect definitely very high quality as far as the build and the execution. And then you combine that again with Laconico's designs. And then of course Sanford Owen's kind of eye for what's hot in the market. And I think you really have a combination for success. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a closer look. All right, before we get into it, quick little wristwatch check here. We do have the latest Helson Shark Diver. This is a 38mm full titanium there with the ratcheting clasp. Really nice. As you guys can see, everything full titanium construction, automatic. Nice and actually thin, but still pretty chunky, which I'm really enjoying. So if you guys are wondering what this watch is as it flops around my wrist while I'm reviewing this fine knife here, that's what it is, and definitely keep an eye out on the channel for the full review. Now, as far as, let's actually first get into a couple of size comparisons here. I'd say probably the most notably comparable, also from Kaiser Knives, is going to be the Mini Intrepid, although the Mini Intrepid is meant to be more of a high-end knife. And I'll bring it back in for some comparisons as far as the action and deployability goes. But let's go ahead and actually get some more, I'd say, kind of common benchmarks here. We have the Delica 4. This is, of course, the actual special model with the wood scales. And then I actually do have this cool little milled pocket clip. But as far as from a size comparison goes, you know, very close in size. And then, of course, you can't have, you know, in this size range, you can't talk about, you know, popular sizes without also mentioning the Benchmade mini grip. Again, this is also a special mini grip there, being the, some people call it, the Grip Million, because it's kind of the baller blue class version that uses some gold class essentially, you know, scales in there with a couple different choices. So as far as the size goes, if you guys have ever carried a mini grip or a Delica, this is going to be right in your wheel housing. So you guys know these aren't large knives by any means. So neither is the EZC. But you know what it is essentially it's an easy carry, and this thing is absolutely gorgeous. Now, from a form factor standpoint, I'm loving this, and I think as far as, you know, the tail of the tape and the numbers, this thing really, really, you know, hits all the right notes with that 3-inch blade. The weight is under 3 ounces. It's right at 2.8 ounces. So really nice, super easy to carry, and very svelte, you know, generally svelte, I should say. But, you know, there's thinner stuff out there. But the nice thing is this isn't overly thin. Although it's a nice carry and fits well in the hand and pocket, the nice thing is it's I wouldn't call it a slim knife, right? It's just right. It's the right size. It has enough. It feels nice and substantial enough. the man, that action is great. You know, you can have it in a couple different grasp there, a couple different holds depending on your task. If you want to choke up a little bit, you can almost use this, you know, it can be worked as a finger guard, but also can almost be kind of a forward choil for some precision work if you really wanted to. Although if you take a close look there, there's not tons of room, but it's so inviting because of that nice little swoop that's there. I'm really digging the hardware, very minimalist, versus what you're going to see, like, let's say from another knife produced by Kaiser, and which they are moving away from that kind of the fancier hardware there. So I'm really digging that. Still minimalist, but not plain. You know, it just has kind of a cool little you know, etch to it there that just gives it. It almost has a look of a collar. But it actually doesn't have one. That's actually just the shape there of that pivot screw. So really nice, really unadorned when it comes to this blade. You're going to have that very simple and very cool MBK logo over that beautiful stonewash finish. And you know, that's pretty much about it as far as branding goes. So this thing is going to feel a lot more like a custom because of the execution and the minimalist design that, of course, Ray Laconico is so well known for. Now, of course, one of the nice features is this thing is just fully loaded. It does have that over travel stop there, and then which is also room for a stainless steel basically lock insert, which is going to help basically because you're going to have hardened steel. You don't want it rubbing necessarily up against titanium. Some people do it, some people don't. You know, if you kind of forego this, then you run the risk of, you know, that lock traveling over time. But you know, if you were to carburize it, you can do it the right way. You don't necessarily need it, but it's nice to have and definitely adds to kind of the feature set here. Also, it has a nice pass through there. It really has pretty minimal as far as that backspace goes. You have a beautifully milled clip, which I love, and as you can see, that little contouring there is mirrored on the opposite side. So style-wise, this is just such a cohesive design. I mean, this thing is just pure kind of man candy in pocket and in hand. As far as the action goes, because it does have kind of that smaller and a little bit of an offset as far as the geometry goes on the flipper, this is going to have a bit of a softer detent, but because you don't really need to have it firing off super hard because of the way that they actually shaped this flipper. And you can misfire it sometimes, but it's not like something where you're gonna have to ever flick your wrist to get it out there. And the nice thing is it's a little bit soft here, so it's easy on your finger as you're flipping. It's not something that's gonna eat you up. And there are plenty of there are plenty of knives out there that with all the extra jimping and whatnot, you can find yourself kind of tearing up your fingers. That's not the case here. And so super easy to carry, to deploy. I'm really a huge fan of it. But one of the big differences as far as the action goes, which you're going to notice with that different geometry, let's say compared to something a little bit more traditional of what you're going to see from Laconico, some of his earlier designs, of course. This is kind of a production version of a baby bear. They call it the Mini Intrepid. And you know, it's actually a little bit smaller than the Ursa Minor, but the way that this, you know, the way this flipper tab is here, you know, it works really nice ergonomically. This is definitely, I'd say, the other side of the scale of Laconico's designs, where this is gonna be a bit more organic, still pretty minimalist, but just a lot more organic in the flow and the kind of wavy and rounded contoured nature here. And then, you know, it does have, you know, a standard clip. It's not gonna be milled, not deep carry, anything like that, but it does the job. And I do like the way it flows. But the way the action is going to be, of course, is a heavier blade, so it's going to fall shut a little bit better. And then because of, you guys can see if you trace this line, basically, it's above kind of the center line of that pivot. So when you fire it, it can have, this one's going to have a bit more of a stronger detent, but you're going to be able to build pressure enough to where it's just going to be really, really snappy action. Now, if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the pocket knife for you, because this one's going to be, it just feels a little bit more dialed in. It's just, it has a smoother action to it, and because it's thin, you know, it's a thin, you know, full flat ground knife, it's not going to be fall shutty at all, and some of that has to do with just the size of it. Some of it has to do with the tension, you know, in the pivot there. But everything is, of course, perfectly lined up, so I didn't want to mess with the pivot at all. And you know, some of it can be the lock bar tension as well. So you're not necessarily going to have like this big snappy rockety type action. This is definitely just going to feel really smooth. And yeah, I don't know. I don't see it as a bad thing. I don't want you to think, hey, well, this has some like weak action when it comes to flipping. Like you can see, I misfired there. Some of that also has to do with finger placement. Of course, normally you're going to want a flipper. You don't want to place any extra undue pressure there on the lock bar. So you can, oh, that was just an awkward flip. And then, you know, the nice thing is, even when you misfire, you're not going to tear your finger up, which isn't the case for every knife. Another quick example of one that I'll be reviewing soon is the IQ from Quiet Carry. Now here, they're relying more on the jimping, right? This is, again, a tiny little flipper. They're going to rely on this jimping to catch, and for you to fire. This is going to be a lot more, you know, this has a much stiffer detent. But when you're building that tension here, a lot of it's going to be on this tiny little piece there, so you don't get as much purchase, but because of the jimping, it enables you to do that. But you can tear up your finger in the process, tear up your nail. So there's kind of, I guess, two you know, thoughts there on that, kind of two different you know, ways to do it. One way being kind of this more smooth, refined flip, there being more of a mechanical kind of snappy flip. So, but I really love this thing. I mean, to look at, to behold, I just feel like the symmetry, the it just has the curves, the lines, you know, every design aspect of this particular knife is just outstanding, and I just can't get enough of it. It's just so beautifully executed. It has that nice little drop point that almost comes to a leaf shape blade there. And of course, it's nice and slicey and does come pretty sharp. Not hair splitting sharp or anything like that, but definitely a sharp knife out of the box, and not something that you necessarily are going to need to take straight to the strop or to sharpen at all. And the nice thing as well is, because you do have a little bit more real estate here, although there's not any type of jimping or anything, your thumb can rest really nicely and comfortably there. Or, you know, if you want to get into some more kind of EDC style cuts. Again, the nice thing is you have places to rest your fingers. Your fingers don't wander, which is nice, because this is kind of a more kind of stick-shaped handle. Everything kind of snaps in, versus, let's say, something like here, where it's more organic shaped. Your fingers, you know, there's a place, this finger goes here, this goes there, then, you know, sometimes your fingers can kind of search depending on the size of your hand, when you do have something that's going to be more contoured versus something that's going to be relatively straightforward here. So in hand, I mean, I'm loving the ergonomics. You know, your fingers don't wander, like I mentioned. The flipper becomes a nice little finger guard, and almost kind of a front choil there if you want to choke up on the blade for some precision cuts. This does have caged ceramic ball bearings, so it's nice and smooth, but again, it's more of a slower open and close. Not going to be quite as snappy as what you would see, let's say, from a Gemini or the Ursa Minor, if you're a big fan of kind of Kaiser-produced Laconico designs. Definitely better for light switch. I don't think you can really push button this flipper tab here, but the light switch is nice and easy on your finger, because there's not a bunch of jimping there. Everything is nicely chamfered. Let's go ahead and make sure that's focused. As you guys can see, nicely chamfered there, so it's not going to eat up your fingers or your fingernail. So really nice from that standpoint. And then you can see kind of the profile there on the clip. It's actually nice and thin, which helps give it just a little bit of flex for your pants and everything, which is nice. This one I haven't disassembled. I did notice that they definitely have changed their philosophy on Loctite though, because I do tend to kind of, if I see anything walking out, I'll tighten it back down. This definitely seems like it would be pretty easy for me to disassemble. I wouldn't worry about it. but they definitely weren't using the access Loctite from what I've noticed so far, which is great. And I've kind of seen them kind of progress away from that. I'd say they're using probably more lube than, you know, the first Gemini I ever picked up from Kaiser. So I think from their factory, they're doing really well. And I think Monterey Bay Knives did a really great job choosing them for this project and sourcing them. Of course, there will be the Yorkie that's going to be coming out, which is kind of a smaller version almost of this knife, and then it's going to have an accent hole drilled in there. But this thing is just gorgeous. So I'd say, you know, for closing thoughts, some comparable options would be something like a Kaiser Feist, which I've always kind of loved to look at. It's a front flipper, similar specs, you know, and then another comparable option would be this Quiet Carry IQ. Now this is going to be using LMAX, so technically a bit of a higher grade steel. I'd say S35. If I didn't mention this, I know it was in the specs in the beginning, but you got the S35 VN. Of course, you know, special U.S. based crucible steel that's was developed with in part by Chris Reeves, famous, you know. But here you're gonna have LMAX, which is considered more of an ultra premium versus a premium steel, and then, you know, a bracket down would be something like VG10, which would be considered like a high-end steel, depending on who you talk to. But basically, there's a couple different brackets. LMAX, it's not quite as popular as Bowler M390 like you would find here. M390, it's definitely going to have a better reputation, just a little bit more consistent, less touchy when it comes to the heat treat, versus LMAX, where we've seen LMAX used in production knives and it hasn't ended well. So that can be a worry for some. I'll give you the full review on this piece probably next week. It wasn't an issue, but I'd say they're very comparable as far as what they're all about. Being minimalist, being design oriented, you know, being not only a cutting tool, but also something that is, you know, handsome to look at. Something that it's an exercise of design as well. And, you know, if you wanted just a pure cutting tool, pick up a Delica. But in the meantime, you know, you can get something like this. Now this one, I feel the IQ is definitely a thin knife, and carries as such. Here, I feel like it's a right size knife. You know, it's the perfect size, and not thin enough for me to call it thin, not thick enough for me to call it bulbous or anything like that. Nicely signed. If I can get up close enough. Get the, there we go. Little maker's mark there. R. Laconico, really nice work as far as from a design perspective from Ray, as usual. Yeah, I feel like this model is just a little bit closer to my sweet spot than some of those other smaller knives when you compare it to, like, let's say the Feist or that Quiet Carry IQ. For me, this just gives me a little bit, it's a substantial enough to not feel like a, you know, where it's going to be teetering in kind of that micro EDC. This is more mini EDC. Again, more akin to something like, you know, one of my favorite little EDC knives, which is going to be the Benchmade mini grip. So this is going to be a lot more akin to that profile. So I'm really digging that. You know, bottom line, minimalist design, you know, the finishing really help this feel much closer to a custom knife than your average production take on a custom. The design is absolutely gorgeous. I think they knocked it out of the park. And then as far as, you know, fit and finish and everything, and an execution standpoint, they just did an amazing job, and really making this feel like it's something special and something very different from a standard, you know, Kaiser knife. Although this came out of their factory, it definitely doesn't feel, it just feels like it's another level above with the design and the execution there. And then of course combined with Ray's really gorgeous design there. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This is a little bit of a long one because I haven't done one of these reviews in so long, but definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks guys.